I never thought my first day at a new company would change my life forever, but looking back, maybe I should have recognized the sparks the moment our eyes met. He wasn't just my boss, he was the kind of man who walked into a room and every conversation seemed to pause for half a second, as if the air itself knew it had to make room for him. Tall, broad shoulders filling out his suit, with the kind of confident stride that made people straighten unconsciously, he had the dangerous combination of power and quiet intensity. I was nervous, clutching my new badge, my blouse sticking slightly to my skin from the nerves, when I bumped into him, literally. Papers scattered, his cologne hit me in a wave that was sharp, expensive, addictive, and when his hand touched mine for a moment too long as we both reached for the same document, I swear my pulse went wild. It should have been nothing, just one of those small office accidents, but I felt something coil low in my stomach, something I couldn't shake. At first, I convinced myself it was only admiration. He was my boss, I had to keep things professional. But every time he leaned close to point out something in my work, every time his hand brushed the desk near mine, I found myself holding my breath, aware of the space between us shrinking. He challenged me during meetings, not cruelly but sharply, like he enjoyed testing my boundaries. I should have hated it, but instead it made me want to impress him even more, to prove I was capable of standing beside him, not just under his command. There were moments when we got stuck in the elevator together, moments when we stayed late working on a project, just the two of us with the city lights flickering outside the window. One night, the air between us felt so heavy that when I bent over his desk to point at a line in a report, I realized I was holding my breath, his eyes tracing down for a split second too long before darting away, as though he'd betrayed himself by letting his attraction show. And God help me, I liked it. I liked the game, the tension, the secret push and pull. I remember how his gaze lingered on the hollow of my throat, on the neckline of my blouse, not enough to be scandalous, but enough that I went home that night and stared at myself in the mirror, wondering what exactly he had seen, and if I wanted him to see more. Maybe that's when I started to change how I dressed, subtly at first, a softer blouse, a skirt that hinted more at the curve of my hips, heels that clicked sharper on the office floor. Nothing overt, nothing anyone could call inappropriate, but enough to make me feel like I was stepping into a dangerous territory I wasn't sure I wanted to leave. And then it happened, one of those small, seemingly meaningless moments that detonated like fireworks inside me. I stayed late again, finishing up a presentation he had asked me to prepare, and when he leaned over my chair, his hand brushed against the bare skin of my arm. It was an accident, of course, but it was also not. I felt the heat of his palm as though he had branded me, and when I turned to meet his eyes, the room was suddenly too quiet, too charged. For a moment, it seemed like he might lean down and kiss me right there in the office, under the hum of fluorescent lights, with spreadsheets glowing on the screen. He didn't. He pulled back, jaw tight, eyes darker than before, and muttered something about going home. But the damage was done. I went home shaking, flushed, both angry and exhilarated, because I absolutely knew, that he felt it too. That was the beginning of the spiral, the secret fire we tried to keep buried under professionalism, but couldn't. Within 3 months, that fire consumed us. And I'll admit it, I let myself fall. I let his hand finally slide down my back one night when he walked me to my car, let his lips find mine in the quiet shadow of the parking garage, where no one could see but the whole world seemed to tremble. I let him pull me close, my body melting into his, every pent-up glance and near touch exploding in that moment. For 2 years, I thought I had found both love and purpose, working side by side with him, dreaming with him, trusting him with every part of me. But here's the thing. The moment I fell into his arms, the ending had already begun. Because what I didn't know then was that this man, this powerful, intoxicating, irresistible man, would one day become my greatest enemy. I used to believe that love and work should never mix, that keeping them separate was the only way to stay sane. But with him, the lines blurred so quickly it almost felt like they had never existed at all. What began as accidental touches and heated glances turned into something undeniable, something that consumed me in ways I couldn't control. And if falling for him felt like stepping into fire, then what came after was learning to live inside the flames. Our nights at the office were no longer about staying late to meet deadlines. They were about desire, about passion that crackled between us even when we tried to suppress it. Sometimes he'd call me into his office under the guise of urgent paperwork. I'd walk in to find him leaning against his desk, tie loosened, sleeves rolled up, his eyes locked on me with an intensity that stole the air from my lungs. He wouldn't have to say a word. The door clicking shut behind me was enough. That sound meant the world outside disappeared, leaving only the two of us tangled in something far more dangerous than business. He'd press me against the glass window that overlooked the city, the hum of traffic below reminding me how exposed we were. My pulse would race as his hand slid to the small of my back, pulling me closer until I could feel every breath he took. He kissed me with a hunger that blurred the line between love and possession, and I let him, because in those moments, being his felt like the only truth I wanted. And yet, while our bodies collided in secret, another part of our connection was blooming in the open: my ideas. It started small, an offhand suggestion during a conversation, a solution whispered while he paced his office frustrated. He tried them, and they worked. Then came bigger ideas, strategies that reshaped contracts, product concepts that doubled our profits, innovations that set us apart from competitors. He presented them to the board with his usual confidence, taking the spotlight as if it had always been his. The applause was for him, the recognition, the admiration. But deep inside, I knew those sparks had come from me. At first, I didn't mind. There was something intoxicating about watching the man I loved succeed because of me, even if no one else knew. But as time went on, the duality of our bond became impossible to ignore. By day, I was the quiet, hard-working employee, the girl people assumed was lucky just to sit near him in meetings. By night, I was the woman he pulled into his arms, the one whose body he explored like he couldn't get enough, the one who whispered visions of the company's future into his ear while his lips traced fire along my collarbone. And yet, I held on to something he didn't realize. I documented everything. Every idea, every sketch, every draft, signed and time-stamped under my name. He thought my brilliance belonged to him, the way my body seemed to, but I knew better. I knew one day, having proof would matter. For now, though, it was our secret, one that made me feel powerful and vulnerable all at once. The company grew at lightning speed. Contracts poured in, competitors whispered about how unstoppable his leadership had become, and journalists wrote glowing articles about his vision. In truth, half of it was mine. But I let him bask in the light because I believed his victories were ours. I believed we were partners in every sense. And the intimacy we shared only reinforced that belief. There were nights where the office became our playground, papers scattered on the floor, his desk a stage for passion we couldn't contain. He knew exactly how to disarm me, his lips trailing along my neck until I melted, his hands tracing lines down my waist, his voice low and commanding as he told me how much he needed me. I craved it, craved him, as much as I craved the thrill of shaping the company's destiny. Colleagues began to notice, of course. The way he smiled more when I entered a room, the way his eyes lingered on me just a second too long. Some whispered, some speculated, but no one dared to say anything aloud. He was untouchable and, by extension, so was I. And in that bubble of secrecy and success, I felt invincible. I thought nothing could shake us. But invincibility is always an illusion. Because when you hand someone your heart, your body, and even your mind, you're gambling on the hope they'll treasure it. And love, especially love mixed with ambition, has a cruel way of blinding you to the cracks forming beneath the surface. Looking back now, I realize how dangerously naive I was. I thought I was building our empire. I thought every idea, every kiss, every night tangled in his sheets or pressed against his office window was weaving us tighter together. I thought I was safe. But I was wrong. Because the man whose hands held me like I was his everything, whose voice whispered my name in the dark, whose confidence filled boardrooms with applause, was already building a life without me. And when I finally uncovered the truth, the fire that had once warmed me would turn into the very flames that burned my world to the ground. I should have sensed it sooner, that tiny flicker of unease that I buried under late nights and the heat of our stolen moments. But passion has a way of blinding you, of making every warning feel like paranoia. That night, he had called me into his office under the pretense of reviewing a new project, the city lights spilling across his desk and glinting off the cuffs of his sleeves as he leaned back with that infuriating, magnetic confidence I could never resist. His hand brushed mine as he passed me a folder, and I felt the familiar spark, the almost electric pull that always made my heart race, my body respond before my mind had a chance to warn me. But there was something different, an almost imperceptible hesitation in his touch, a glance flicking to the door as if he expected someone else, someone I didn't know about. I ignored it, clinging to the warmth of his proximity, the familiar surge of desire, until my phone buzzed, a message I wasn't expecting from an unknown number. It was a picture, a casual, intimate moment, unmistakably him with her, the new girl who had joined the company 6 months ago. My stomach dropped, the air sucked out of the room, leaving me dizzy, my pulse hammering in betrayal and disbelief. He leaned closer, oblivious, whispering something about the report, and I had to bite my lip to stop myself from screaming, from confronting him right there with the proof in my hand. Instead, I forced a smile, my hand brushing his as I returned the folder, my body betraying none of the chaos swirling inside me, though every nerve was on fire with fury and heartbreak. That night, I went home trembling, replaying every late night, every touch, every whispered, "I need you," realizing that for 6 months, he had been feeding 2 flames and only one had been mine. And yet, as angry and hurt as I was, a part of me couldn't deny the thrill, the memory of his lips, his hands, the way he could make me melt even now, even knowing the truth. I had to be smart. I couldn't let my emotions destroy the advantage I held. The proof of my ideas, the patents, the documents, all in my name, were my leverage, my weapon. And if he thought our passion had been only about him, he hadn't counted on the mind behind the body he adored. Days passed, and I watched him from a distance, every interaction, every careless compliment to her, every subtle brush of her hand against his arm, catalogued and stored in my memory. I began testing, probing, suggesting initiatives with the same brilliance as always, all while keeping my calm, my face serene, my body just out of reach, just enough to remind him that he had lost control. He noticed nothing, his arrogance, his confidence, made him blind. And yet, that same confidence would become my tool, the very thing that allowed me to maneuver behind the scenes. My heart still ached with betrayal, but my mind was sharp, calculating, imagining the exact moment when the tables would turn. Every touch, every glance he offered me now was laced with tension, a dangerous dance where I feigned ignorance, even as I drew closer to the strategies that would one day be his undoing. And in the quiet moments, when I remembered the nights of heat and whispered promises, I felt a cold satisfaction mix with the familiar longing, knowing that the very fire that had bound us would soon consume him. The betrayal cut deep, but it also illuminated the path forward. I would take everything from him, his company, his pride, his illusions of control, and when the moment came, he wouldn't even realize it until it was too late. That night, as I closed my eyes and felt the echo of our last embrace, I swore silently. The man who had stolen my trust would soon learn that the woman he desired was more powerful than he could imagine. And as the city lights glimmered through my window, I felt the first spark of a plan that would not only punish him, but ensure that when he fell, he would fall completely, utterly, leaving nothing but the memory of the fire he had once thought he controlled. The taste of betrayal still lingered on my tongue, sharp and bitter, as I began planning my first move against him, every nerve on fire with the memory of his touch and the knowledge that he had been seeing her behind my back. I reminded myself that desire could be a weapon, that the same heat that had drawn me to him could now fuel my strategy, sharpen my mind. I watched him carefully, noting every glance, every careless smile toward her, the way he leaned just slightly when they talked, as if my absence made no difference at all. The first attempt was subtle, almost invisible. I manipulated a minor contract, nudged a deal in a direction that would reveal a flaw in his overconfidence. But he was clever, experienced, and though I felt the rush of anticipation, the plan unraveled in ways I hadn't foreseen. He laughed it off, unaware that the seeds of my strategy were already planted. The second attempt was bolder. I tried to expose a discrepancy in the company accounts, something small but significant enough to put him on edge. I stayed close during board meetings, leaning over his shoulder under the pretense of showing documents, my body brushing against his in ways that reminded him of the nights we had shared, the heat we had once shared in secret. My pulse raced, my mind sharpened. The game was on, and yet, once again, his arrogance shielded him. He waved it away, confident, charming, completely oblivious to the storm I was quietly assembling. It was maddening, exhilarating, intoxicating. The mix of desire and revenge, lust and strategy, kept me teetering on the edge of my own restraint. I caught myself imagining the feel of his hand against my back as I whispered instructions under his nose, or the warmth of his breath when he leaned close to question a point, my body betraying my mind, even as I played the perfect calm, collected employee. I realized then that his self-assurance was my greatest weapon. The more careless he became, the closer I got to the moment when all of this, the passion, the betrayal, the genius I had hidden in plain sight, would collapse around him. I kept feeding him the illusion that he remained in control, that I had forgiven him, that our nights together were still private, stolen sparks of what we once had. Every touch, every casual brush of fingers in passing, every lingering gaze I allowed, reminded him of the fire we had shared, keeping him blind to the meticulous planning that was underway. By the end of those weeks, I had 2 failed attempts behind me, each one teaching me more about his patterns, his weaknesses, and the perfect angle of approach for the final strike. And through it all, the erotic tension remained palpable, even as I feigned calm and controlled distance. The memory of our intimate moments, the heat, the longing, the whispered names in the dark, spurred me on, fueling a dangerous mix of desire and vengeance. The greatest irony was that every failure only strengthened my resolve, made the final victory sweeter in my imagination. I knew that when the moment came, he would never see it coming. His overconfidence, his arrogance, the very traits that had made me fall for him, were the chains that would bind him. And as I watched him smile at her, unaware of the storm gathering around him, I felt a thrill run through me, a pulse of dark anticipation. The first 2 plans had failed, yes, but failure was temporary. I had patience, intellect, and desire on my side, and I would wait until the perfect moment arrived. And that moment, when it came, would be devastating, absolute, and irreversible, leaving him powerless, exposed, and finally taught the lesson that passion and betrayal, when wielded correctly, could be a weapon more lethal than any contract or boardroom maneuver. I smiled to myself, heart racing, knowing that even as he thrived in his ignorance, I was building the cage around him, brick by meticulous brick, and nothing, no charm, no arrogance, no lust, would save him from the fall I had planned with such precision. The night ended with me alone, reviewing notes, tracing connections, every nerve alive with anticipation, imagining the moment I would finally strip away his illusions. And I promised myself then, as the city lights glimmered through the office windows, that Part 5 would be the end of him, the final collapse, the ultimate reckoning for a man who had thought he could have everything and everyone, and would now lose it all. The day finally came when everything I had been planning, every calculation, every careful maneuver, converged into a single, unstoppable moment. He walked into the office that morning, confident as ever, unaware that the very fire he had once commanded in our private moments had been transformed into the force that would strip him bare. I handed him the documents, smiling softly, the same smile that had once made him lose himself in me, now hiding the storm I carried. "Just sign these," I said, my voice calm, almost casual, letting the weight of my words settle around him without a trace of the tension coiled beneath the surface. He took them, skimmed them carelessly, the arrogance that had always made him untouchable blinding him to the truth that every clause, every line, was under my name, my control, my ownership. As his pen scratched across the pages, I felt the same pulse of desire I always had when he leaned close, brushed my hair behind my ear, whispered my name in the dim office light, but this time it was mixed with triumph, with power, with the knowledge that he had just handed me everything, completely unaware. And the fall began immediately. Contracts, accounts, assets, all shifted seamlessly, invisibly, to me. Colleagues who had once admired him now whispered, looked at him with disbelief, and in the silence of the office, the reality hit him. His empire was gone. My hands trembled slightly, not with fear but with the intoxicating thrill of victory, as I watched the man who had once made me melt with a single glance, a single touch, stand stunned, utterly exposed. And then came the final blow, the one I hadn't even needed to plan. His young lover, the girl who had enticed him with her charm and desire, had always been there for the money, for the illusion of power, and the instant she realized he was no longer the king of anything, she walked away. No arguments, no calls, no remorse, just the cold click of her heels fading into the corridor, leaving him empty-handed, abandoned, and completely alone. I felt a strange mixture of satisfaction and dark amusement, recalling how he had thought he could have it all, his power, his control, our bodies, our minds, and now he had nothing. His eyes found mine, a mixture of shock, disbelief, and a flicker of something I used to recognize as desire, but it was too late. Desire without power is weakness, and he had none left. I didn't speak. I didn't need to. The quiet hum of the office, the clicking of keyboards, the murmurs of colleagues, all emphasized the reality he could no longer escape. I was at the top, the one everyone whispered about behind closed doors, the woman whose mind and vision had built what he had foolishly believed was his alone. And even as I walked past him, brushing lightly against his arm, letting him remember the heat we had shared, I knew that this final fall was complete. He had been seduced, not just by me, but by his own arrogance and lust, and in the end, both had destroyed him. The empire he had thought belonged to him was mine, every asset, every strategy, every recognition flowing to me as if it had been predestined. And in that quiet triumph, I allowed myself one final thought. He had betrayed me, thought he could play with passion and intellect alike, and now, stripped of everything, he was powerless, just as I had once feared losing myself to him. The irony was intoxicating. The man who had seduced me, who had commanded my body, my trust, and my mind, now cowered in the shadow of the woman he had underestimated. And as I turned and left the office, the city lights reflecting in my eyes, I felt a pulse of exhilaration and freedom, knowing that I had won completely, utterly, and that the life he had taken for granted, the passion, the power, the illusion, had become my own. And I smiled, the final thought burning bright. He had betrayed me with a girl who wanted only money, and I had taken from him everything, leaving him with nothing but the echo of the fire he once thought he controlled.